Every evening at exactly 5 o'clock, the kettle would hiss to life. She didn't need to check the time anymore. Her body had learned the rhythm. The clinking of cups, the scent of cardamom, the gentle swirl of milk. It was all muscle memory now. She set out 2 cups on the faded wooden tray. One floral, chipped slightly at the rim, his favorite. The other plain white, hers. They hadn't spoken much during tea for years. It wasn't because they were angry. It was just that words had slowly drained away, like sugar dissolving at the bottom of a cup. In their place, there was routine, familiar, predictable, quiet. She would glance out the window while he sat in his armchair, staring at nothing, his hands resting still in his lap. Sometimes he would hum a forgotten tune. Sometimes he wouldn't even sip the tea until it went cold. Still, she brought it every day. The neighbors called it sweet. The knock came just as she was about to carry the tray into the living room. 3 soft taps, hesitant, as if the knocker wasn't sure whether to knock at all. She paused, her hand midair, tea gently rippling in the cups. Visitors were rare, especially at this hour. And no one ever knocked so gently. Wiping her hands on the edge of her apron, she moved toward the door. When she opened it, the last thing she expected to see was her. The girl couldn't have been more than 25. Her face was soft, uncertain, her hair pulled back in a loose braid. She held her hands together tightly in front of her, as though holding herself in place. There was nothing threatening about her, but there was something unsettling, a strange pull in the air. "Good evening," the girl said, voice low but steady. I'm sorry to disturb you. She glanced past the woman, toward the hallway. "I think I knew your husband. A long time ago." There was a pause. The woman's eyes narrowed slightly, trying to place her face. She didn't look like a neighbor, nor someone from the past few years. Yet something about the girl's eyes stirred a memory. Not clear, but shadowed, like a photograph left too long in the sun. "Knew him how?" she asked, her voice firmer than expected. The girl hesitated. "It's complicated. I'm not here to cause any trouble, I promise. I needed to see him. Just once. If that's okay." Behind them, the kettle clicked off. Silence wrapped around the doorway like an invisible thread. She didn't invite strangers into her home. Not anymore. Not since he got sick. But something in the girl's tone, the quiet desperation, the way she wasn't demanding, made her step aside. "The tea is getting cold," she said quietly. "Come in." And just like that, the door opened. Not just to the girl, but to a story that had waited years to finish. The girl stepped inside cautiously, her gaze sweeping over the hallway, the walls, the silence. It was the kind of home where time didn't move, where even the dust seemed respectful, gathering only in corners, never daring to disturb the carefully preserved calm. In the kitchen, the woman poured fresh tea. Her movements were quiet, almost ritualistic. She didn't ask the girl's name. Not yet. Perhaps she was afraid of what it might be. The girl waited by the dining table, her eyes drifting. She wasn't snooping, just noticing. On the shelf above the old radio, half hidden by a faded doily, sat a small metal tin. It was out of place in a room full of wooden bowls and ceramic jars. Bright red, with a dent on one side and rust curling at the edges. Her eyes lingered on it. "That box," she asked gently, "is it old?" The woman didn't look up from the cups. "Very. Do you ever open it?"
No.
A pause. "Not anymore." The girl didn't press. But something about the way she asked, the way her eyes kept flicking toward it, as if the box had called her, made the woman hesitate. She hadn't touched that tin in years. Not since before the illness. Not since before everything had started falling apart in slow motion. Wordlessly, the woman walked to the shelf, took the tin down, and placed it on the table between them. The latch stuck for a moment, then clicked free. Inside was a quiet storm. Old letters folded into squares, yellowing at the edges. Polaroids with people smiling, some familiar, some not. A pressed flower, now brittle and brown. A receipt from a tea shop, no longer standing. A photo of her husband, much younger, arms slung around someone else. And beneath it all, a baby bracelet. Blue ribbon. No name on it. The girl didn't say anything, but her breath caught. Just for a second. The woman, too, stared into the box, her face unreadable. I haven't looked at this in years, she murmured. Who's the child? The girl asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The woman looked up, finally meeting her eyes. And this time, there was recognition in the stare. Not of the girl, but of something deeper. A shadow from the past. A thread now pulling loose. That, she said slowly, is a question no one's ever dared to ask. And outside, unnoticed, the tea began to boil over. The steam curled from their cups, swirling between them like invisible threads of the past, waiting to be pulled. Neither woman touched the tin again. It remained open on the table, silent, but louder than anything either of them could say. The girl wrapped her hands around the cup, but didn't drink. She looked around the room once more, not lost, but searching, as if trying to find pieces of herself in someone else's life. I remember a garden, she said quietly. A small one. There were marigolds and a broken swing set. The air always smelled like cinnamon. The woman's fingers stiffened around her cup. My mother used to say, the girl continued, that memories are like ghosts. You never know which ones will visit you. Or when. She finally looked up. Do you remember a place called Wally Town? Near the old railway line. The woman blinked. Once. Slowly. That was decades ago, she said. Before this house. Before everything. The girl nodded gently, as if she already knew. My mother lived there. A long time ago. She never spoke much about it. But once, only once, she mentioned a man. A kind man, who made promises he didn't keep. The woman stayed silent. She never told me his name, but she wrote it once, in a letter she never sent. I found it after she passed. A pause. I think it was your husband. The woman's heartbeat slowed, but her breath quickened. She hadn't heard the name Wally Town in years. It had been a different life, a chapter quietly closed, locked, and buried beneath routine and tea and years of silence. What do you want from him? She asked softly. Nothing, the girl replied. Not revenge. Not pity. Just the truth. A name. A reason. Outside, the sky had begun to dim, casting long shadows through the lace curtains. The house felt suddenly older, heavier. Like it too remembered. The woman looked at her husband's untouched chair, still facing the window, still empty. Then she looked at the girl, really looked. There was something familiar in her face, not in the features, but in the sadness. A sadness she had once worn herself. She finally said, some truths are hard to hold. They shake the ground you thought was solid. The girl answered quietly, so does silence. And so, between 2 cups of tea, one half drunk, the other growing cold, a life once hidden began to echo into the room. The tray felt heavier in her hands that evening. Maybe it was the weight of the tea, or maybe it was the weight of the truth that had started to stir after years of silence. She walked slowly down the hallway toward the bedroom, the same path she had walked every evening since he had fallen ill. Time had changed him. The man who once moved with quiet strength now lay in bed, bones pressing through skin, eyes sometimes lost in fog. As she opened the door, the light from the hallway spilled across the bed. He turned his head, slowly, as though even that small motion took effort. I brought your tea, she said gently, the way she always did. But her voice was different tonight. Softer. Tired. She placed the cup on the bedside table and reached to adjust his pillow. He didn't respond at first. But then his eyes moved. Past her. Toward the doorway. She turned. The girl had followed, quietly, respectfully. She stood with her hands clasped in front of her, like a child unsure whether she was welcome. The old man blinked. Once. Twice. And then something shifted behind his eyes. Recognition. It wasn't complete, not loud, not dramatic, but it was there. A flicker of shock. A shadow of memory. The corners of his mouth moved, not quite forming a word. His eyes, pale and tired, glistened. The girl didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her presence said everything. She stood still, letting him see her. And after a long moment, his expression softened. Shock gave way to something gentler, something that looked a little like peace and a little like surrender. She stepped back into the hallway. The wife stood beside the bed, watching her husband, watching how he looked at the girl like someone remembering a dream or a mistake, watching how his eyes followed her as she disappeared from view. And then he turned his face toward the window, the faintest smile tugging at his lips. The tea sat untouched, steam rising, fading. He never drank it, and she didn't ask him to. The house returned to stillness after the girl left. No footsteps, no voices, just the quiet creak of floorboards and the soft tick of the hallway clock. The wife stood at the door for a moment after closing it, hand resting on the handle as if unsure whether to turn back or follow after a truth that had already begun to slip away. In the kitchen, the tin box remained open, forgotten, exposed. She moved without thinking, returning to the table to clear the cups. Her hands trembled slightly, not from exhaustion, but from something deeper. The feeling that a door had been opened inside her, and something irreversible had stepped through. She lifted her own cup, then his. But as she reached for the saucer beneath his tea, her fingers paused. There, tucked neatly underneath, like it had always been waiting to be found, was a folded piece of paper. Yellowed slightly, edges soft. Her breath caught in her throat before she even opened it. She recognized the handwriting instantly. His. Her husband's. She unfolded the note slowly, like peeling back a wound that had long since scabbed over. If she ever comes, let her in. Don't be angry. Not at her. Not at me. I was young and a coward. I made promises to two hearts, and I broke them both. She deserves to know. And you. You deserved better than silence. I loved you, even when the past came knocking. Forgive me for hiding it all in tea and time. Her eyes stayed on the paper long after she had finished reading. Not crying. Not yet. Just still. Like the letter had poured truth into her without permission. She sat down, folding the note again with gentle fingers, and placed it beside the tin box. It didn't answer everything, but it was enough to break something open. Enough to make her realize she hadn't been imagining it all these years. The moments he drifted, the names he never spoke, the nights he stared too long into nothing. The past had never left. It had simply been waiting, folded, quiet, and patient, beneath a saucer. She sat by the kitchen window long after the sun had disappeared, the letter resting on the table beside her like a quiet witness to a life she never lived, and one she unknowingly shared. Outside, the garden swayed in the evening breeze. The same garden he had once planted for her, tulips in spring, jasmine for the summer nights. It had felt like love back then. Gentle, warm, safe. But now she wondered what else had been planted and buried. The letter hadn't shocked her as much as it should have. That realization cut the deepest. Because deep down, she'd always known. Not the details. Not the names. But the weight. She had felt it in the pauses between conversations, in the way he sometimes stared too long at their wedding photo. She had felt it in the late-night walks he took alone, in the way he'd touch the baby clothes they never used and then quietly put them back. There had been another life. One he never spoke of. One that still bled into the edges of theirs. She thought about the girl. The softness in her voice. The way she stood in the doorway, uncertain, but not bitter. Seeking, but not blaming. She had her mother's grace, perhaps. Or maybe her father's quiet guilt. And now, she realized something even more painful. She had helped him hide it. Not on purpose. Not knowingly. But in her patience, in her silence, in her choosing not to ask hard questions, she had made it easier for him to never answer them. She hadn't just shared his life. She had helped him rewrite it. And now, sitting with the truth in her hands, she saw it clearly. Their marriage wasn't built on lies. It was built on what they both chose not to say. And that silence, comforting as it once seemed, had left space for secrets to survive. She reached for the cold teacup, took a slow sip, and let the bitterness settle on her tongue. There were no villains in this story, just people trying to live with their choices. And one woman realizing she had been loving half a man her whole life, while the other half had quietly lived in the spaces between their words. The next morning was overcast. The sky hung low, heavy with unspoken rain, just like the air inside the house. She hadn't slept. Not really. Her body had rested, but her thoughts hadn't. The letter lay beside her on the bedside table, folded neatly, as if placing it there might somehow contain what it had released. She expected the girl wouldn't return. Most people ran from complicated truths. But by noon, there was a knock at the door. Gentle, just like before. This time, she didn't hesitate. The girl stood with a faint smile, the kind that wasn't for politeness but for peace. "I hope it's okay," she said softly. "I just needed to come back. One more time." The woman nodded and stepped aside. No words. No questions. She led her into the kitchen again, the room where everything had begun to unravel. They sat across from each other, the teapot already on the stove. This time, there was no pretense of normalcy. No need for masks. The girl looked around, her eyes lingering on the tin box, now closed but present. "My mother never told me who he was." "Not even in the end," she said. "She just said he was kind and scared, and that he made a choice he didn't know how to fix." The woman listened, her hands folded in her lap. "I'm not here to shame anyone," the girl continued. "I don't want money or names on papers. I just wanted to see where I came from, to see if I looked like him, to see if he ever thought of me." She paused. "And now I know he did." The woman's throat tightened. She nodded slowly. "He did," she whispered. "More than he ever admitted. Even to me." There was a silence, the good kind. The kind that lets grief exhale and grace enter. "I'm not angry," the girl said. "Not even with him. Some people carry their mistakes so long, they forget they can set them down." The woman's eyes filled, not with sorrow, but with release. "You're kind," she said. "I'm just tired of carrying question marks," the girl replied. They drank their tea in quiet understanding. No dramatic confrontations. No revelations left to shake the air. Only two women, one older, one younger, sharing the weight of a secret and somehow lightening it together. And when the girl left, the woman didn't feel empty. She felt lighter. Not because a secret had been erased, but because it had finally been shared. The house was quieter now than it had ever been. No breathing from the bedroom. No footsteps in the hallway. No unexpected knocks on the door. She moved through it like a ghost, not lost, just done. It had been 3 days since he passed. Peacefully, they said. As if peace and regret could live in the same breath. He hadn't spoken after that day. But he didn't need to. The letter had done all the speaking he ever would. Now, she stood alone in the kitchen, boiling water for just 1 cup. No tray. No second saucer. The garden outside waited, soft and quiet under a sky that couldn't decide if it wanted to rain. She wrapped her hands around the cup and walked barefoot to the spot beneath the old rose bush, the one he had planted the year they were married. They had once stood here, young and breathless, making promises that felt like forever. Now only one of them remained. She sat on the old stone bench beside the bush. The roses were in bloom, full and blushing, unaware of the weight pressing into the moment. She didn't cry. Not anymore. Her tears had run their course in the night, soaking the pillow that once held his sleep. She simply held the tea, watched the steam fade, let the cup grow cold in her palms, a quiet ritual of goodbye. Because this was more than a drink. It was a symbol of all the things that were never said. The love that existed between the silences. The secrets that found shelter in routine. The child that was never spoken of, but never forgotten. The woman who came and left and brought peace without punishment. No one would ever know what really happened. No one would read the letter. No one would understand the heaviness in a cup of tea gone cold. And maybe that was the way it should be. The ground was soft beneath her fingers. She dug gently, pushing away petals and soil beneath the rose bush where they had once stood hand in hand, hearts full of promises and futures not yet written. The letter was folded carefully, the edges worn, the creases deep. Her hands didn't shake now. Not from grief. Not from fear. She had made her peace, in her own quiet way. She had read the words a dozen times, memorized the curves of his handwriting, traced each regret, each apology, each piece of love and shame and silence that had shaped the life they built together. And now it was time to let it go. No one else would find it. Not their children. Not the girl. Not anyone who might turn it into gossip or judgment or another kind of burden. It wasn't for them. It was hers. And his. And it would remain so. She placed the letter in the earth like planting a memory. Not to grow, but to rest. To stay hidden. To stay safe. Then she covered it slowly, patting the dirt flat with her palm. She took the cold, untouched cup of tea, the last she would ever make for him, and poured it into the roots. The liquid soaked into the soil, darkening it for a moment before it disappeared completely. A final offering. A quiet funeral for the truth. As she stood, she looked down at the bush. The roses swayed gently in the breeze, bright and unaware, blooming over the buried secret. And she smiled. Not out of joy, but peace. A peace earned the long way. Some stories aren't meant to be told. Some confessions are made only to be buried. And some truths, the ones that live in old letters, silent tears, and the space between two teacups, die with the last sip.